You are listening to the Techie Leadership Show with Bogdan and Andrei.
Hello and welcome to the Techie Leadership Show. Today with me I have Vladik Khononov. He is a software engineer with over 15 years of industry experience, during which he has worked for companies large and small in roles ranging from webmaster to chief architect. Vladik is a long-time proponent of domain-driven design and revolutionary architecture and currently helps companies make sense of their business domains, untangle monoliths, and tackle complex architectural challenges. He lives in northern Israel with his wife and an almost reasonable number of cats. Hello, Vladik, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Andrei. Thanks for having me here.
Well, it is my pleasure to have you. And I'm really curious about the number of cats that's reasonable.
So we started with 2, and then suddenly it became 3. And we said, okay, that's too many. Now it's 5.
Well, hopefully they don't get even more than that.
Let's see. I was pretty sure when we had only 3, I said, no, we are not going to have any more. And look where we are at right now. So
you're at 5. Well,
yeah, so I'm not committing anymore.
Not really to anything. Do you want to add something else about yourself, Vladik?
Well, basically, it's what you've said. I'm passionate about programming. I got into programming when I was 8 or 9, I don't remember. Back then, I had a Soviet clone of ZX Spectrum computer. It was really bad. Like, I wanted to play games, but they just didn't work. So out of curiosity, I picked up a book. It was called Programming in the Basic Programming Language. I didn't even read it. I just copied those lines of code and played with them and modified them. I just fell in love with this. I understood that, okay, instead of just playing games, I can create my own games. So my goal and my dream became to write my own computer games. And here I am right now, about, well, too many years later. I didn't write any games whatsoever, but as you've said, I work at different companies, from small startups to huge enterprises, different roles, from webmaster to chief architect. And not long ago, I decided to step out of my comfort zone and try something new. So now I am a cloud architect at a company called Do It International.
Amazing. Now you went like for different roles a lot. Too bad you didn't get to write a game or work on a game. But it's good that's I think most developers started, especially if they start really young, they start with the idea that they're going to write a game or create a game or something like that. That's what gets you to learn.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And work. And then you stumble onto business applications and you never get out of them.
Yeah, and then you're deploying SharePoint at the middle of the night.
Yes, if you get to be a cloud architect. Yes, you get to work on that part. And do you get like calls at night, or do you have problems, or is everything systematized?
No. So actually, at my previous workplace, we started as a small startup. I was the first employee, so I had to do everything.
Yes, I know how it is.
Yeah, so in that company, I was the chief architect. So I did everything in the beginning. Then we gradually started growing. We got more and more people. But anyway, somehow I always was the one who fixed problems in the middle of the night. And, I've been doing it for almost 9 years. And probably that's what broke me. So I said, okay, my next gig, I want to try something else. So now I am a cloud architect doing some, let's call it micro consulting gigs. It's completely different, and I am sleeping at night.
Nice. That sounds really good. That's the dream of
Yeah, yeah,
especially leading developers and everything. You want to sleep sound at night because you don't want your application having bugs or anything and getting the call like it's crashing. Wake up
yeah,
and fix it.
yeah.
Well, Vadik, I'm really curious about your stories. So let's get into them. What is the biggest leadership success story you witnessed personally?
Well, you know, it's hard for me to think of a leadership story which is kind of dramatic with a leader who leads a group of people and saves them or something like that. But
Doesn't have to be dramatic.
yeah, but I do have a different example. And in the
Okay.
introduction, you've mentioned that I'm a long-time proponent of domain-driven design. And domain-driven
Yes.
design, it's a way to design a methodology for designing software systems. And it started with a book with the same title, printed in 2005, I think, or 4, doesn't matter. And slowly, gradually, there was a community built around domain-driven design. And for me, that community is an example of great leadership because, it's hard for me to point out a single leader of that community. Instead, we have many people like Eric Evans, Von Vernon, Matthias Verais, Nick Tune, Alberto Brandolini, and many others. And all of them are leading this community together. And the way it works is people in this area, they really tend to care about each other, to
Yes.
elevate other members of that community, to help them, to motivate them, and most importantly, to provide opportunities for each other. So I don't know, maybe it can be called as, I don't know, group leadership or shared leadership, but the way that community works, I think it's a very curious, interesting example of leadership success.
It is. And it's something that happens a lot especially in the software development field. There are a lot of communities that are growing and you have a type of a friendship amongst the members and a level of help that is truly surprising and you don't find in other fields, which is bad that other fields cannot enjoy the same level
Yeah, definitely.
of friendliness inside of communities.
Yeah, exactly.
And since you've seen this community evolve and grow like from the beginning,
Yeah.
what would you say was the key to its success for it growing and becoming bigger and bigger and having happy members?
So in my opinion is, first of all, as I said, even though Eric Evans, he wrote this book, Domain-Driven Design, in 2005, still, he didn't take this role of being the glorious leader of this community or anything like that. He is a very interesting person. He's one of the smartest people I know. And interestingly, often when he speaks about domain-driven design, he says, well, this methodology, it's not complete. It's up to the community, to evolve it, to move it forward. And yeah, I think that this decision to allow the community to evolve this methodology, that's what makes this community so successful and so flourishing, if I may say that.
Yeah, and that's something that I found like through other discussions that I have, previous discussions on the show, is actually that good leaders, they don't give the whole answer. They actually leave their team members or the group members to work the answers themselves and come up with their own solutions, own perceptions to enrich the whole notion, the whole project that is getting worked on by the group.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So yeah. And for me, your insight is really interesting because it works even like, especially like in a group that it's not as to say as formal as you say, like you would have like a team in a job setting. When you have like a community, it takes even more mastery, more leadership mastery to be able to guide it and lead it without looking like an autocrat. You cannot use like coercion to grow the community as much as you would like to. It doesn't work because people just will not join the community anymore.
Yeah, well, we do have examples of such communities. For example, I don't know, for example, Linux, as an open source project, we can say that it's led by one person. And most of the time, he wasn't the nicest person in the world, to say the least. But it still did work, right?
Yeah, it still did work. It's also the fact that once you have the amount of work to create an operating system, it's pretty hard for people to go out and say like, we'll build one from scratch ourselves. When you're working on communities that are built more around ideas, you can just rephrase those ideas into something else and rename them and have another community that discusses basically the same thing but with other terminology. So it's harder to say like to build a community that's coerced when it's an idea based. When you have like a lot of work, like for example, like you have in Linux, or you have some other major frameworks or languages, even software languages, yes, there is like, for example, I come from the Ruby community and I love a lot Matsumoto and the whole concept that you have in the Ruby community of we have to be nice because Max is nice. That's like the mantra that's going on for the community, and people are amazingly nice inside the Ruby community, which I appreciate a lot. Yeah,
that's cool. I never wrote a single line of Ruby code, I have to admit, unfortunately.
Well, give it a try and see how it is. It's not that complicated. It is a language that, besides it helps you get work done, it also provides at least from my point of view, it provides the most level of pleasure when coding and working. And the whole community is striving towards creating as much pleasure when working and writing code and making it as effortless and pleasurable as possible. So that's like the goal behind of it.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, for me, that was like, yeah, it was a good philosophy for me. And Vladik, moving on, I'm curious, what is the biggest leadership failure you had the unfortunate experience of witnessing?
Failure. Okay, so for a failure, again, I will give an example from the same area.
Okay.
So without mentioning names and patterns and stuff like that, let's say that we do have other methodologies for designing software.
Yes, we do. There are a lot.
Yeah, so we have a lot of them, but there is a few of them, and people who came up with those ideas, they were quite opposite of what happened in domain-driven design. So instead of, motivating the community, those people decided that, first of all, they came up with those ideas, so they are the authorities. And second, instead of teaching other people how to use their ideas for their advantage, instead they concentrated on putting down other people's ideas by making some derogatory comments about other people's ideas and stuff like that. And what happened was those comments turned many people away from them, because just not everybody want to listen to people who just saying bad stuff about other professionals.
Yes.
And that's really unfortunate, because their ideas were great, like they are great, at least some of them. And they do need to be heard. But right now, many people don't want to hear those ideas because of the way they are communicated. So for me, that's a huge leadership failure. Because again, some of those ideas are great. I do believe in them. I think they could make the world a bit better, to evolve our industry a bit.
Yes.
But it didn't happen. And for me, that's the reason. Because they scared people off.
Yeah, and there are concepts that you find somewhere where it's really hard to find out some concepts or ideas. There might be really valuable, but they don't never see, let's say, like the day of flight. They don't propagate through the community or build a community around them, and get like to a certain number of people inside of it that it snowballs and everybody finds out about the ideas, and you start having all kinds of other ideas built on top of them and different flavors of the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from one point of view, I think it's bad that it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you have something that is so different than what you have already. That exactly, like as a developer, usually you find out that new ideas are old ideas repackaged, and really new ideas that are breakthrough ideas, they're really hard for them to see the day of light, because you have big names that either ignore them, or as you said, like sometimes they put them down, and then they never catch the imagination of the community.
Yeah. By the way, in those specific cases, it's a bit opposite, because there were like taking on some older ideas with their new stuff, but they couldn't get any traction because of the way they were communicating their ideas.
And that's something like, do you find, Vladik, that communication is even more important when you are a developer?
Yeah, of course. One of the biggest lies of our industry is they used to tell us, come to us, work with computers, you won't have to interact with people. Bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Even more so if you want to be a senior software engineer or an architect, or God forbid team leader. I'm just joking about God forbid. It's okay to be team leader.
Yes.
But if you came to the industry because you didn't want to interact with people, then maybe it's not a good idea.
If you work in a team, like just two developers working together, they have to communicate a lot just to make sure they don't spend a lot of time fixing each other's bugs and problems
Yeah.
and having integration issues. So there's a lot of communication, even in a team of two developers that they're working, for example, let's say they're working on their own program or their own project. So, and they don't want to sell it, they don't want to do anything like that, just for themselves, to
Yeah.
build something that only the two of them are going to use. They still need to converse and talk through a lot of issues and a lot of problems together to be able to bring it to the day of light.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, the domain-driven design methodology, one of its practices is about how to simplify the communication between teams working on the same project, or how to simplify the communication between software engineers and the business people, the domain experts, product managers, etc., which is a type of headache on its own when you have to interact with business people.
It's sometimes it's not pleasure. Well, I know. What do you recommend, like, to have? Because based on your experience, what would you recommend to make it more efficient and really get the right information from business people to build something that they're going to say at the end, yes, it's what we wanted?
Yeah, so, back in the university, I did a research, why software projects fail. And
Okay.
interestingly, the majority of them fail because of communication issues. And it may, by the way, if you look at different papers, they may not state it clearly that communication is the reason for failure, but it may be something related. For example, business people didn't communicate their requirements, or engineers didn't communicate their progress. Anyway, one way or another, it's somehow related to communication.
Yes.
And that's why I fell in love with domain-driven design, because at the core of that methodology is the practice of how you can understand domain experts' way of thinking about the business domain of your system, how to speak with them in the same language, not in the language of, I don't know, classes, methods, or store procedures, but in the business language, in the language that they do understand, and in the business domain that they're experts in. And the second part of domain-driven design is actually how can you translate that knowledge of business domain into software, into components of a system, and how to implement the system's components in such a way that your code, even the object model you build, speaks the language of the business domain. That's the goal of domain-driven design. And for me, I know it may sound scary, if you look at the first domain-driven design book, it's scary. It's like, I don't
Yes.
remember, 700 pages. There are other books by von Vernon. Even I wrote a book on domain-driven design. We can speak about it a bit later. So my advice, first of all, to acknowledge that communication is a deciding factor in software development success. And I'm pretty sure that everybody with at least some experience in our field can find at least a handful of examples where things went wrong because of poor communication. And there might be different types of communication. And again, in my opinion, domain-driven design, even if you're not going to use it in your day-to-day life, I think it's something that each software engineer has to be familiar with.
Yes, I agree with that. So, for example, I never used domain-driven design. I used some concepts from it, but I got familiar with it, and was able to take some concepts that I said, like, I like these parts, and
Yeah.
I'm going to apply them to this project because I think they're going to work really well.
Yeah.
And since we're talking about like domain-driven design, do you think could you say like a little? Could there be like a domain-driven leadership?
Domain-driven leadership. That's interesting.
Yes, like taking concept from domain-driven design and applying them to leadership.
So I would say that anybody who practices domain-driven design, and I'm speaking about both strategic and tactical domain-driven design, in one way or another is already doing what you called domain-driven leadership. Because in domain-driven design, you are not just building your entity model in code. You have to validate the model that you are implementing in code with domain experts. You have to speak with them in their language.
Yes.
You have to validate those models and those ideas. You cannot rely on some translator or like a software analyst, like that guy from the movie Office Space. So,
Yes.
I'm taking the requirements from business people and communicating them to the engineers. No, it doesn't work that way. I believe that to truly succeed in complex business domains, software engineers have to validate their ideas and their understanding of of the business domain with domain experts. And once they are doing it, that's already leadership, in my opinion, because they're helping the whole team, to understand the problem domain better, to understand the problem that the software is supposed to solve. And it doesn't matter what title you have in that team. It doesn't matter if you're a junior engineer, senior, or an architect. If you follow those domain-driven design practices, first of all, you're making sure that, not making sure, but at least you're making it, you're increasing the probability that your software is going to solve the right problem for the customer. That's the first thing. Second, if you implement your code in such a way that speaks the business domain, the language of the business domain, then you're helping other engineers to understand it because they're going to read your code. And again, that's leadership, in my opinion. So these two aspects, in my opinion, is more than enough, for domain-driven leadership. And that's something that anybody in the team can do.
That's some great insight, especially the one that you are the leader of the code you write, and it doesn't matter if you're a junior, a mid, a senior, whatever rank you have in the team, or how much experience you have. If for the lines of code you write, you are the leader, you own them, you have to be able to communicate and talk about them, and work on them, improve them, and make sure that the rest of the team understands exactly what is going on there.
Yeah.
And as you said, because there's lots of software that was written, millions of lines of code, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So also have to take care that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And Vladik, based on your 15 years of industry experience, what is your leadership philosophy?
Leadership philosophy. You know how they say that if a tree falls in a forest and there is nobody around to hear it, does it make any sound?
Yeah.
And it doesn't, because it just vibrations in the air. It doesn't sound.
Yes.
In the same way, I think that leadership is not only about being the leader, but those who are there to hear the tree fall, they play a not less important role here. So, in my opinion, to be a successful leader, you instead of concentrating on yourself, like, I will have this confident voice and I will dress fancy and I can speak nicely, stuff like that. Instead, you have to concentrate on the other side, on the followers, and make sure that what you're doing is providing value for them, right?
Yes.
Because if you don't, well, you may look like a leader, but it won't last long.
Yes.
And in our industry, we have plenty of ways to provide value. It doesn't have to be only by leading people, like being a team leader or having some senior position, like, I don't know, a CTO. But even if you're a junior programmer on a team, but you're curious about your profession and you're learning stuff that other people do not learn, and you can share that knowledge and you can elevate their knowledge, in a way you become a leader, right?
Yes.
So for me, leadership, my philosophy is providing value. It's not really, for me, it's not really about having the title of a leader, but again, providing value, and it doesn't matter what kind of role you're playing currently. If you're providing value, one day or another, your role is going to be upgraded, for sure.
Yes, that is true, and that is the key, especially if you're working in a tech company. Adding value is so important, and bringing new and fresh ideas, because there are so many out there, and all more are getting generated each day. So it's hard for each individual member of a team to keep abreast of everything that's happening in their domain or in other domains. So if you are capable of bringing new ideas, and ideally if all your other teammates bring new ideas, it makes it easier to stay afloat in the sea of information, in the tide of information that is happening nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, a junior can join a company and provide a fresh look at things that the company is doing. But at the same time, the company has to be willing to hear for those new ideas.
Yes.
And unfortunately, in many cases, many are not willing to hear the new ideas. And here it's really the challenge for that leader, to communicate those ideas in a way that will make them heard. And maybe there will be some Jedi tricks that need to be applied, but usually there are ways, to make yourself heard in a company.
So which ways are you talking about? Do you have some tips on this?
So often at conferences, I'm being asked about how do you convince your team to use domain-driven design, or how do you convince your team to use event sourcing? And event sourcing is a very peculiar pattern. It says that instead of storing information in a database, which represents state of the objects, instead store them as a log of operations that were committed, like history of changes. And instead of having a state, you can always project that state from that log of events. Now, if you're a junior and you come to your team leader and you say that, hey, I read a book about event sourcing, and instead of storing our state in a database, here's what we can do. Well, probably the team leader will say that he is crazy. It won't scale, nobody is doing it that way, etc., etc. But what can be done instead is that engineer, instead of speaking with other engineers, he can speak with business people and tell them, hey, look, Currently, we are storing the information in this way. We have this state. What could you do if instead we were storing this log of changes? And at any point of time, we could get a consistent state of that entity at each point of time. And and we could always represent this information in new models. And then those business people will start generating new ideas. Oh, I could do that and this and that. And at some point, they will be selling event sourcing.
Because it's going to come down for the requirements, and the easiest way to do it would be through event sourcing.
Yeah. And again, we spoke about leadership philosophy. So I think it's another example of providing value. When you're speaking to engineers, in this case, they may not see the value, but business people will see the value here. So yeah, concentrate on the value.
And who gets to benefit more from the idea?
Yeah, exactly.
And in the case of software, it's always the end users that are going to benefit the more. So if you can provide value for them, you get to try all kinds of new ideas inside your software.
Yeah, they're paying for the software, so.
Exactly. And since we're talking like even juniors can be leaders, and it doesn't matter like the position you're in to be a leader, what would be your top leadership tips for aspiring leaders?
So first of all, what we just spoke about. First of all, it's not about you, the leader, but you have to concentrate on the followers, on the people you're leading. You have to provide a value for them. And in many cases, you have to be able to see the world from their point of view. So for me, that's the first tip. Be aware of who are the people that you want to lead, and make sure you are able to see the world from their point of view. Make sure you understand their problems, and make sure you are able to provide value for them. Second.
All ears.
Sorry?
I'm all ears. I'm looking really forward.
Yeah, so second, communication is important. Again, we're speaking about it. So make sure you're practicing your communication skills. And communication is not only in speaking, it can be in written form, it can be public speaking, and it doesn't matter. You have to be to make sure that you're upgrading your communication skills. Start blogging, to polish your writing skills. Start doing some public speaking. I know it may be scary for many in our industry, but you have to do it. There is no other way around it. You have to do public speaking. Fortunately, we have many opportunities nowadays. We have meetup groups. You can do presentations at your company. There are plenty of opportunities to do public speaking. So make sure you leverage those opportunities. And most importantly, make sure you gain feedback and act upon that feedback. Make sure you are improving yourself in these areas.
And Vladik, before we move to number 3, I want to double down, especially on the written one.
Yeah.
It's something that I find it's really crucial for developers, because nowadays, if you're a developer, you have to create some form of documentation. And when you complain about another developers or another system's documentation that is not good, is because people there didn't know how to express themselves in writing, usually. And you yourself have to do the work to get better at writing documentation, and not just documentation, emails.
Yeah.
whatever you need to write, messages in Slack messages. Nowadays, most of the communication that is happening around a project is in written form. You have tickets with requirements, and then you have all kinds of comments inside of the tickets. Sometimes they don't make sense.
Yeah.
It's not because the person doesn't know how to talk or doesn't know the issue. He just doesn't know how to write his thoughts and put them on in the ticket, in the email, in the documentation, wherever they have to be. So take time. I highly recommend this. It's a skill that you might not be the best developer, but if you are the best at articulating your ideas in a written form, you're going to be better judged and evaluated than someone that's way better at coding, for example. Definitely. Okay, got that out of my chest. So for number 3.
Yeah, one more thing about writing. Many people say, well, you tell me to blog, but what am I going to blog about? Like, there are blogs about everything. I don't have anything new. And the thing is, you don't have to write something new. You can cover some topic which has been covered before 100 times. But if you're doing it in a more friendly manner, like if you make it more accessible, then
Yes.
it's already worth it, worth that effort. And if not, you are practicing. That's okay. Like, don't expect your blog to be a hit from the very first day. It's not going to happen. But, you know, each blog you write, you will become better at writing.
So true. And the number 3 tip, Vladik?
And the number 3 is don't be afraid of conflicts. And, you know, I don't know why, but I've always been afraid of conflicts. And I had to understand that conflicts are a part of life. And when there are multiple people interacting, there are always going to be conflicts. And we have this natural tendency to take things personally. Like, oh, he doesn't want to use that pattern. He probably hates me and I'm going to kick his ass.
You go from pattern to personally really fast. Like, he hates that pattern, he hates me because you didn't even invent the pattern, so it's not your creation. Maybe the inventor might say it.
Yeah. Especially in Israel, things are escalating fast. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And especially when you have people that are really passionate about their software, their craft, their craftsmanship, there's going to be a lot of conflicts, idea conflicts. They're not like developers. I don't want people that are not in software listening to this get the idea that we're actually software developers are actually hidden warriors that fight with in the office. No, physically, no. They're like idea conversations and kind of conflictual in nature because someone has an idea, the other one has another idea, and they're fighting about which idea is better and which one should be used. And usually all the time for implementing the solution is spent fighting about how to do it.
Yeah.
And then you use the simpler solution that's neither of the ones that were discussed.
Yeah, that's so true. People are like fighting about how we're going to do that, but a month later when they gain more knowledge about the problem domain, they realize, hey, both of us were wrong.
But your arch nemesis by now, so there's no chance of getting back from it.
Yeah.
But it's also something that if you're capable of taking it lightly, so not get personally involved, having this kind of debate about software
Mhm.
It's really refreshing, and it's one of the major benefits that you're going to have by being a software developer. Is being
Yeah.
able over a beer or during a meeting to have a conversation that is highly intellectual that you don't get the opportunity to have in other settings. So you get to use your brain in these situations, and you're talking with other smart people, ideally. So it's going to be really stimulating.
Yeah, you have to work on your emotional intelligence, to make sure you are controlling your emotions, to make sure that you're not letting your reptile brain to take over your thinking. You know, in many cases, when things get personal, and that's something that I've learned from my my good friend Tsahi Malik. One day he told me that, look, people are good. Even if you're fighting with someone, you have to understand their point of view. Like, they're
Yes.
not, most probably they don't want to harm you. Like, they just have a different point of view, and you have to understand that. And if somebody is reacting in a way that you didn't expect or stuff like that, well, it happens. You have to acknowledge that it happens to you as well, because you don't know what the person feels, what battles he's fighting right now.
Yes.
Maybe something is wrong in his family, stuff like that. So that single tip from Tsahi made a lot of impact for me. Once I could, once I understood this, it allowed me to look at the things differently.
So now, Vladik, you don't get when you're discussing like patterns or approaches to a software problem, you don't get personal now about the solutions you're proposing.
Yeah, so I'm not punching the person in the face right away. I wait a bit, just to
You
give
wait a bit for them to
just
give you a little more ammunition.
a great way to manage conflicts, and again, there are going to be a lot of them. In
Yes.
once you're once you take some kind of leadership role, you're going to get yourself into conflicts. There is no other way around it. And a way to manage conflicts that I really like was introduced by Eliyahu Goldratt. Eliyahu Goldratt
Okay.
is known for theory of constraints and the book The Goal, but he had many other really good books. And in one of them, he says that conflicts can be solved pretty easily. All you have to do
Huh.
is to dig into people's way of thinking and find conflicting assumptions. And
Ah.
once you identify that conflicting assumptions, the conflict evaporates. And again, that's information is priceless. This method of managing conflicts is priceless. It just works. You have to just, when people cannot agree with each other, it's not because one of them hates another one, but they probably have some conflicting assumptions. You have to uncover those conflicting assumptions. Once you do, the conflict goes away.
And I guess the best way to find the conflict assumptions is by asking questions.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you're talking, it means the other side is finding your conflicting assumptions. You're not doing any finding in that situation, so you're on your
Yeah.
way to losing that that conflict.
Yeah. Exactly.
And Vladik, since we're talking about books, what is the book that had the most profound impact on you?
I would say that one that I just spoke about. It's called The Choice by Eliyahu Goldratt. It's not a popular book. Again, he's more famous for the book The Goal. But for me, the choice is a life-changing book. Again, in this book, he introduces the concepts of inherent simplicity. And Eliyahu believed that things around us are simple. We are just complicating them. And again, he goes into these concepts in this book. I probably cannot, describe it in a few minutes. So inherent simplicity, his method for a conflict resolution, it's called evaporating cloud. It's described in that book. And finally, he also speaks about what I've learned from my friend Tzachi that we spoke about before, about people being just good. People are not being inherently evil or stuff like that. That's something else that he is covering in that book as well. So I think the choice is the second book that everyone in our industry has to read. The first one is Domain-Driven Design.
It sounds like an amazing book, and I'm going to put it on my list of books to read. My list is getting bigger and bigger with each interview.
You will love it, believe me.
I am sure. Vladik, if people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
Well, I have a blog. It's vladik.com. It's VLADIK.com. Or Twitter. My Twitter handle is the same as domain name. It's VLADIK. And that's pretty much it. I'm not really active on other social platforms like Facebook.
And you also have a book on domain-driven design. What's the name of the book, and is it on Amazon?
So I have a book. It's called What is Domain-Driven Design? A simple title. My goal was to write something different from the original Domain-Driven Design book, to make it short and accessible, something that you can read in a few hours. So I wrote this book for O'Reilly, for their online learning platform, which means you can only read it there. You have to log into Safari Books Online. If you are a new member, you get a 2 weeks trial period. 2 weeks is way more than enough time to read my book. Again, the goal was to write a book that people can read in a few hours. I think it's 90 pages long, and that's all. And also, in the next few months, I'm going to do an online training on the same O'Reilly's platform, online learning platform. They're doing like small, short courses, about 3 hours long, and I'm going to do a training on domain-driven design for monoliths. And I'm going to introduce what is domain-driven design and how you can apply that knowledge if you already have a brownfield project, which is probably a monolith.
Yes, everybody has a monolith, at least one.
Or a distributed monolith, which is way worse.
Way worse.
Yeah.
They're more common now because people just wanted to build them that way. But so it goes. Now everybody's trying to put them back together in the same in the same repo, in the same code base. Like they're monolith, let's at least make it look like one. Well, Vladik, it's been a true pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been amazing.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was today's episode. Tune in daily. Rate, like, subscribe, and share, please. Oh, you can find further info and materials in the show notes on techyleadership.com, including links to the guest book recommendations.